Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness YouTube channel. I am Millie, and I am here today to give you the forecast for the spring Aries equinox. So, unlike previous weeks, instead of going through the energy day by day, I'm simply going to explain the energy of the equinox overall. Really, the entire week revolves around the energy of this equinox unfolding. So, it's better if I give you that information in small digestible pieces, okay? Now, before we can truly understand what the equinox opening means for us, it's important for us to a little bit and understand where we are coming from, okay? And where we are coming from is from a very significant and heavy Sun-Neptune conjunction in the sign of Pisces. What this means is that there is a part of our identity, of our belief systems, of a narrative, of a part of being in the world, of a part of a way that we show up in the world that is dissolving with the power and the energy of Neptune over the sun, which represents that identity, that egoic tie that we have with whatever is really looking to fall away, to wash away with those Piscean waves. Now, it's important to understand that this isn't about eradicating parts of ourselves. Pisces, after all, is the sign of the zodiac that reminds us of the gift of compassion and grace. So much more than just the dissolving of that part of us that can have it can sound like it's a part of us that's simply going to go away. It's more about, how do I hold this part of myself that has kept me safe for so long in a much more tender, compassionate, and understanding way? And how do I invite this part of myself that has kept me safe in the best way that it knew how for so many years, potentially, into a new space in which we have to exercise courage? And so in that very holistic progression of energy, we are understanding why Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac and how it moves us into a new beginning in Aries. Because if you've seen a zodiac wheel, right? If you've seen a chart, it's circular. That has a meaning. It means that there is a holistic process to life, and one sign from the next is meant to be built on to the other, okay? Now, that crossing over from Pisces to Aries, yes, there is either a very real or metaphorical ending, death, in order for there to be a rebirth, okay? It is so important that you have the context of what that Neptune Sun conjunction in Pisces means, because it is not easy to have a part of our ego that has kept us safe simply to dissolve and go away and say, I'm ready. Let's go to the next thing. I have all the courage in the world. It's not about that. It's about a much smoother transition while answering the call of the universe. Because Aries is such an energy where we feel a pull, where we feel this is where you're meant to go. And there's a little bit of a sense of urgency. So if you're feeling that sense of urgency from something outside of you, from a partner, from a job, ask yourself how that feels. What does that urgency trigger in you? And what does that trigger tell you about a potential fear, about what you're not ready maybe to move into, but something that you have become aware enough about that you know you don't want to stay there? I find it so important to talk about this because it is not spoken about enough. And I think that a lot of times people get this idea that, why don't I feel ready? I should just feel ready. Where is my courage? Why am I not taking action? Because the Sun-Neptune conjunction is about parting ways in some way, or at least creating a very discerning distance between you, who you are now, and who you're being called to become, and the part of you that in the past has kept you safe. So as we move along in this week, and as we move towards this opening of the spring equinox, It's not about, I have arrived and I am wise and I know all the things. It is about, I'm opening myself to this very exciting opening, very exciting pull, and I'm bringing all of my parts, knowing that who I am now actually drives the wheel of my, drives the car of my life, right? Has the control of the steering wheel of where my life goes. And that's a very different way. That's a very different way of moving from this very deeply profound Piscean energy into the first sign of the zodiac and starting anew in some way. Okay. So for those of you in the Substack subscription, your horoscopes are going to talk about how you're moving from that Pisces energy, where you're being asked to have courage. I'm also going to talk about the Mercury retrograde, the solar eclipse in Aries, and the lunar eclipse in Libra. It's all in one. So I really invite you to subscribe if you haven't. Let's get started. So what is the Aries equinox? The Aries equinox is when the sun touches the 0 degree of Aries in the zodiac. This is the very beginning of the zodiac. It's usually in the spring in the northern hemisphere, and it's called the beginning of the astrological year. Now, what this is inviting us to do is really to begin anew. Now, it's important to understand the force of the equinox and where it's happening, okay? It's happening during an eclipse season. We don't always have equinox energy that happens during an eclipse season. I will create separate videos for the lunar eclipse in Libra and the solar eclipse in Aries, but it's important that you understand that eclipse seasons are a very powerful spiritual energetic portal of time that invite us to take a step back in terms of our ego and allow our soul to guide us into the next step. So as we move into the spring equinox, a lot of people are very excited to start new things, and there's nothing wrong with that, not at all. Really take things one day at a time. And for those of you who are starting something new, whether it's a project, a job, you moved, a new relationship, take things one day at a time. And more importantly, allow yourself to be new at something, because the influence, the energy that surrounds this equinox is very different. It is brand new energy, okay? And here's why. One of the first things that the sun does as it moves into 0 degrees Aries is that it immediately creates a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius, okay? Pluto in Aquarius represents a different era. Pluto in Aquarius is more of power to the people, power to the group, power to the collective. So much of the sun in Aries has to do with who am I? What do I want? What do I need? How am I the leader of my life? If the first thing that the sun does is create a favorable aspect to Pluto in Aquarius, this is also a big question around, what is my place in the collective? What is my place in my environment? What is my place in my community? And so this in turn, to me, feels like there is immense transformation happening at an egoic level, that let's say someone knew you for so long as a doctor and now you're a yoga teacher. Think about how your environment is going to change. What is your place in the collective? What is your place in your environment and your groups of friends? There is something about what we have been known for externally that is shifting and transforming towards something that feels much more genuine and honest to us. That is the sun sextile Pluto. Now, I don't think that a lot of people are having a lot of resistance towards this. I think that people are actually embracing this because it is a sextile. We feel invigorated. I think we feel very energized. A lot of people feel very creative. Now, on the other hand, this can actually scare some people. And I think especially if it has to do with something much more internal. I mean, any external change that we experience is because something happened internally first. But let's say that this is something that you're experiencing in partnership and relationship. Maybe you feel differently about a relationship. Maybe you're being asked to show up differently for the relationship. And you really have to ask yourself, am I willing to let that, am I willing to let that, to not allow myself to be that anymore? So example, I think we've all heard of being the cool girl, right? Can you let go of the cool girl persona who is distant and detached and pretends that they don't care about the relationship or the closeness? But essentially, the cool girl persona is only something to keep you safe, right? To keep you from getting hurt, to keep you from getting vulnerable. That is what this energy is about. When there is something internal that's asking to be transformed in order for you to answer this pull, this calling of the universe that I talked about at the beginning of the video, it can feel scary, even if we know that dropping that facade, dropping that part of the ego is actually helpful, is actually for our growth and our evolution. I want to bring that in because while this is a beautiful opening, any sun connection to Pluto implies some kind of transformation. And transformations are not always easy. They're not always easeful. And if there is anything that the sun in Aries is asking us to have is courage. The cosmos don't ask us to have courage if courage is not needing to be exercised. So that means that we will come face to face. We will have to confront situations in which, in our own way, due to our own circumstances, we have to exercise courage and show up differently. Because the Pluto there implies, especially Pluto in Aquarius, the transformation that looks very different than who you were before, Aquarius. Now, another important aspect of this energetic opening is the fact that Mercury, the planet of communication, cognitive thought, how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves, is also in the sign of Aries. And it's making a conjunction to two very, very important points. One is the North Node in Aries, and the other is Chiron in Aries. So what does this represent? I think it's also important to remember that the spring equinox isn't just a thing of a week, is not just a thing of a month. This is an energetic opening that lasts between the equinox and the solstice that comes June 20th or 21st, depending on where you live. So understand that a lot of the themes that I'm talking about right now, you will be working through over the next 3 months with all of the other astrological aspects that happen in between, okay? So that's why it matters even more to talk about the dissolution of the ego and truly stepping into a courageous space in your life, because that doesn't happen overnight, and nor does it happen within a week. It takes time. It may not even happen fully within the next 3 months, but what it does invite you to do is to be much more intentional and pay attention to how it comes up in your life, and hopefully you being able to make a different decision every time you're confronted with it. Okay, this is where those SUBSTACK horoscopes really come into play, because you understand the themes that are being touched on here. Mercury in Aries is no filter, right? It goes from here to here. I'm not thinking about what I'm saying, it's just coming out. On the one hand, I think that having a Mercury in Aries is quite refreshing because, because it takes away a lot of the fillers, a lot of the wishy-washiness that can come with other placements. It's about being direct. Aries energy appreciates directness. It It's almost, if you've ever had an Aries in your life, it's like, I am showing you how much I care about you and respect you by telling you things to your face and being direct to you. That can be the energy of Mercury and Aries when we are relating to other people. Now, what does that look like within ourselves? I think on the one hand, because Mercury represents cognitive thought, our ideas, what we're thinking about, what we're imagining and envisioning. And in Aries, I think our mind is going to be a lot on new beginnings. I'm getting really excited by this idea, by this project, by working with this person. I'm getting really excited at the thought of. I'm getting really excited at the thought of. That is one thing that you really want to keep in mind, especially over the next 6 weeks. I am getting really excited at the thought of. Okay. Now, hold it there, because Mercury in Aries goes into its pre-retrograde shadow phase on Monday, March 18th. What that means is that Mercury is getting ready to go retrograde from April 1st to the 25th. But there's always a pre-retrograde shadow phase, which means that Mercury is transiting the degrees in which it is going to retrograde on at the time of its retrograde period. Okay, so here we have this great equinox opening where I'm being invited to have all the courage in the world while being kind to a part of ourselves that's dissolving or not having as much power in our life. And then Mercury, I want to start now. I want answers now. I need to know now. I need to be clear now. That's where we can tend to go, but it's entering its pre-retrograde shadow phase. We have to keep in mind that anything that we're thinking about right now, communicating, we will be working through this to March 13th when Mercury finally exits its post-retrograde shadow phase, okay? So it is about 2 months, 8 straight weeks in which the conversations that we have, the thoughts that we have, the plans that we have, it will take some time. Why? Because we don't have all the information that we need, whether it's because we're waiting for external information from someone or somewhere else, or because the conversations that we're having, particularly in relationships, they're new conversations. So let's say that you've been experiencing some, some tumultuousness in your relationship. This eclipse season, this equinox opening is inviting you to attempt to move forward with the relationship from a different space. Well, one, the decision has to be made between both people. We will no longer do that. We will begin to do this. Okay. Now, choosing to do that and actually exercising that takes practice. For couples, this is a great time. And really, for any types of relationships, this is a great time to begin therapy because you're rewiring neurological pathways, Mercury, to start anew, Aries. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, Mercury in conjunction to Chiron, Chiron, the wounded healer, Chiron represents, in Aries, represents the wound and the pain that comes with choosing the self. The pain that comes with having the courage to speak, with having the courage to stand for myself. Mercury and Chiron together, a few interpretations, you can really heal a heavy judgmental narrative within yourself. It's the understanding of how much have I actually grown when I judge myself, when I'm harsh with myself. How does that even help me? And instead saying, you know what I'm going to start anew, Aries, is a different way of communicating with myself. And Chiron tends to represent healers, anyone who is in a facilitating space to help us do that. So this is a great time, again, if you're wanting to work on how you speak to yourself, how you feel about yourself, what you think about yourself, who can you work with? What kind of books can you begin reading? What kinds of things can you begin learning about the rewiring of the self-talk? But more importantly, What is the wound deep down that causes you to have that internal narrative about yourself? That's the most important thing. Why? Why, you ask? I'm so glad you asked. Because the North Node in Aries is there. The North Node is an evolutionary point that not just invites us to grow, but it kind of forces us to grow. And right now, there is an accumulation of Aries energy, starting something anew, in which a part of our ego is no longer taking the forefront of our life, in which the way we speak to ourselves and others needs to change, our perspective needs to change in order to truly start anew. The North Node in Aries implies that this is difficult, that this is new. Yes. Is there growth there? Is there soul evolution there? Absolutely, 1000%. And the North Node will always represent the part of the chart that we're being called to evolve in, and that's hard. Evolution and growth don't happen when everything is just smooth and great. Evolution and growth happen when there is a clashing, when there is contrast. So this spring opening, this equinox opening, is beautiful for new beginnings, but we have to mind what part of me is showing up to this new opening. What is my narrative? What are my thoughts? What are my words? It can't just be, I'm the same person with the same habits, with the same relational habits, with everything the same, but this energy is just going to open up this window and it's going to transform me and change me. That's not how it works. And we have to know that, because I think it does take a certain amount of courage to say, that's the change that I need to take. And anything with Aries implies an action. This equinox opening doesn't come without us saying, I am going to do the thing that feels really difficult to do right now. Now, this is very different than initiating something new. This is about taking self-responsibility with where we are internally and saying, I choose to begin to make changes to that, and understanding that it takes a certain amount of time. Another important aspect of this equinox opening is the fact that Venus is in Pisces, but Venus is creating a conjunction, a coming together with Saturn in Pisces. So a lot of times the way that Venus-Saturn conjunctions are described traditionally is in a pretty negative, through a pretty negative lens. It can represent inhibition, the inability to experience pleasure, the inability to make money, the sense of feeling ugly, like the hindering of a lot of these Venusian themes. I personally have a Venus-Saturn conjunction natally, and while I have experienced those expressions of a Venus-Saturn conjunction, what I have come to find is that when I started taking responsibility, when I started looking within, this is a very different expression of this energy. To me, a Venus-Saturn conjunction represents the ultimate commitment, and I think first and foremost to the self. Venus in Pisces is the opportunity for us to be kinder with ourselves, have more grace in our process, exercise compassion and forgiveness for ourselves. Look, to me, it's not a coincidence that we have this equinox opening that implies so much healing, while we also have an activation of Pisces energy. We are healing so much of our past self or selves in order to truly move into something new. But Venus and Pisces on its own, it can be, I'm just going to be healed and it's all going to happen on its own. And I'm just going to let this energy wash over me. No, Saturn there is saying, how are you committing to yourself? Saturn will always point out the responsibility that we have to ourselves. And here we have an energetic opening fueled and charged with Aries energy, which is about taking action. But with Pisces, it's about taking action from a much wiser and less reactive place within us. Venus-Saturn conjunction in this opening implies a commitment to the self or another from a very compassionate, almost surrendered space. And here's what I mean by surrender. I think that especially when we're confronting really difficult parts of ourselves or life, there comes a point where we have to just say, okay, I'm tired of fighting this. I'm tired of ignoring it. I'm tired of running away from it. What is it here to teach me? And I surrender to its guidance. And from that place, I make different decisions. I want to make that very clear because on the one hand, while eclipse season invites the ego to take a step back, that doesn't mean we just sit around and wait for something to happen. I think what it really means is that we become much more mindful of where we are making decisions from. Because Venus and Pisces on its own, let's say that Saturn wasn't there, it can very much be, oh, woe is me, feeling sorry for self, and using that as an excuse to not do anything at all, right? To not take, first and foremost, to not take responsibility for the self. But with a Venus-Saturn conjunction, it is about, I am committed to my self-love. I'm also committed to my self-love from a place of grace, from a place of understanding that I am a human being that is learning, that in a lot of ways has to unlearn a lot of things before I can move forward truly in the way that I desire and that I envision. This Venus in Pisces, this Venus-Saturn conjunction Pisces creates a sextile to the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. This is another aspect of this equinox. And to me, this means if you dare to take self-responsibility, Saturn in Pisces, there is a lot of growth. There is a lot of interruption of pattern, Uranus, growth, Jupiter. But you have to be very honest and very grounded in the knowing of where you are now. That's Taurus. And Taurus is, as an earth sign, represents the showing up step by step, day after day for the self. But more importantly, Taurus represents the wisdom and simplicity. And so some of the questions that can come up right now is, where am I creating chaos in my life in order to avoid actually working on the thing that's being asked to be worked on, right? Where am I creating distractions in my life? Where am I running away from in my life in order not to face my own shadow? It's really great to talk about Aries energy, the autonomous self. I am my own boss. I am responsible for myself. I am an individual. But what is the point of that if you are not evolving in the commitment and the self-responsibility that you owe yourself? And so Taurus here is about the reminder of, while all of this energy is great, come back to earth. Come back to earth, because in order for that vision to take place, in order for the relationship to feel and look like what we want it to feel and look like, we have to show up. We have to show up. It's not going to happen on its own. It's really, and I think this is where astrology gets a bad name, because it's really interesting to me how sometimes people say, oh, this Mercury retrograde is screwing me up. This eclipse season is really messing with me. And it's like, no, all that this is doing is putting a really big magnifying glass on the things that you have been avoiding in some way, shape, or form. And that's true for all of us. That is true for all of us, which is why everything leading up to a spring equinox may feel like, why are these thoughts coming up? I thought I had overcome that. I thought that I had worked through that. And the point is, for all of those things to come up, in order for you to have the courage to confront them in a very grounded way, Taurus, in order for you to grow and evolve from them. So this energetic opening is very powerful, very powerful. But we have to understand at a personal level the parts of our soul and our psyche that it's touching in order for us to say, oh, that's why I feel the way I do. Because I think that another thing that happens with these openings, with these astrological events, and the way that they're described is that they could sometimes be so abstract that an individual person is left leaving, well, what does that mean? Like, I don't feel that way. I feel terrified, right? Okay. So when we ground it in this way and when we break it up into digestible pieces of what this might mean, that becomes a different relationship with astrology. So why am I saying this? Because one, I think it's important that we begin to look at astrology and describe it in a different way. And two, I think that it's important for you to recognize what you're feeling at any given moment and let that be the guidance. And then astrology just gives an additional context as opposed to completely dictating what you're experiencing and why, as if you have absolutely nothing to do with it, right? And even though eclipse seasons tend to be a time in which we are really confronted with a lot of spiritual lessons more than anything, and yes, the ego is meant to take a step back, we are still very much involved in where our life goes and the decisions that we make. Okay. So I hope that this is helpful. I hope that it resonates and lands with you in the way that it's meant to. And I will be back next week to talk about next week's forecast.